It's a pretty cool honor to be speaking in the Graves Lecture Series. I had Dorset Graves as kind of a substitute professor, and he always amazed me with how long he could talk. So I hope I don't do that tonight, but we'll see what I can do. And I found out that I have a little laser on this, so if I use it too much, just tell me. But feel free, if you have any questions, stop me as we go along, because this is sports, it's fun stuff, and I never knew there were so many stat geeks in Chadron who were interested in this, so I appreciate you all coming. But you might be asking yourself, why is it called Behind the Polo Shirt? Well, just like police officers have uniforms, lawyers wear suits, sports information directors, and in particular a lot of athletic communicators, except Con Marshall, wear polo shirts. It's kind of the calling card. As I'm sure Dave Collins, who's here, when he is on the road broadcasting, you can probably pick out SIDs because they're the guys or ladies who wear polo shirts with khakis. It's pretty much their uniform, and so that's why it's called that. And that's why I have a polo on tonight as well. So like any good presentation, I think we need to start a little bit about myself. And I promise not to talk too much about myself, but we got to start at the beginning. I never thought my career would be in sports. When I went to high school, I wanted to be an actor. I had dreams of being on the big stage. And my friend Dave Salyer, when we were seniors in high school, said, "Hey, how about you join the student newspaper?" And it was the most fun I'd ever had. I'd always dabbled in writing, but then when I actually got the chance to be published, it was a lot of fun. And so I really enjoyed it. And that kind of stoked a passion inside me. So then I went to junior college. And they didn't have a paper there, but I kept writing. I kind of still wanted to be an actor. And then I came to Chadron State, and I didn't really know what to do, but I knew I needed to have a hobby. And so I joined the Eagle. And this is me in college. I was asked a lot of questions. Usually none of them had to do with journalism. You can kind of infer what those topics might be with the length of my hair. But I worked for the Eagle for 3 years. I was the entertainment and sports editor and learned a lot under Levita Dickinson, whom a lot of you probably know. I had a great time at the newspaper. But when I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do. I had an English literature degree, and I often tell the story. I was walking down the halls of the administration building. They said, "Things you can do with an English degree." And the number one choice was be a stand-up comedian. And I'm thinking to myself, anyone can do that. If you can speak and tell a couple jokes, you can do that. But luckily I had a minor in journalism. And while I was working at the student newspaper, I had done some stringing for the Scottsbluff Star-Herald, which led me into my next job. So that very debonair man with a beard and a 70 to 200 millimeter lens covering baseball game was a sports reporter for the Scottsbluff Star-Herald. I worked there for 2 years. I learned a lot under Jeff Fielder. He was my sports editor at the time, and Steve Frederick. A lot about deadlines. It was a daily newspaper, and so that really kind of helped me develop a work ethic that has served me well since I was hired as the sports information director in 2007. The funny thing about that picture, Con took that picture, who's here tonight, and when he wrote the story about when I was hired, Con always loves to say if the person is married or whatever, and he wrote, "Helmbrecht is single and has 2 Labrador dogs." And that was published in the Chadron Record, and never had I been so proud of having 2 dogs. And so then, obviously, I'm the director of college relations now. So
what happened to the picture in between?
Which one?
The Unabomber.
I don't have that one. That's in my office. Yeah. That was a Halloween costume gone wrong.
No, you wore that for about a year.
Hey, it was a good look. But anyways, okay. So here we go. What is a sports information director? Well, according to Wikipedia, a sports information director is a type of public relations worker who provides statistics, team and player notes, and other information about a college or university's sports teams to the news media and general public. The abbreviation is SID. So when I was hired in 2007, I get to replace this guy, Con Marshall. A press box is named after him. I got to share an office with him. We had the same phone number. Lots of fun times in the Klein Center. I learned a lot from him and Justin Haig. We shared an office. I was kind of in the middle. But Con, as everyone in Chadron and Dawes County knows, is a legend in the SID field and in the journalism field. He's an RMAC Hall of Famer, a Chadron State Hall of Famer, distinguished alum, all types of things. It's been a real pleasure of my professional and personal life to work with Con and to know him on both of those levels. A funny thing about the distinguished alum, I had the opportunity to speak at that for him, and he took notes during the thing. So if you take notes tonight, I'm going to be mad at you. But Con, as I mentioned, is a respected journalist. If anyone needs to know anything about Chadron State, they typically talk to him first. And he has the ability to type anywhere at any time. As Daniel Binkard, who's back there providing the video tonight, can attest to this, Con went with us to the RMAC Track and Field Championships, and he wanted a flat surface to type. And Daniel was working on photos at the desk in the hotel room, and I was typing away on the bed. And Con, as industrious as ever, grabbed a chair and went to the bathroom and started typing. So that is actually one of the good traits of being an SID, is the ability to work anywhere at any time. So here are the actual job duties. And once I got over the fact that I wasn't going to be Con or be like Con, I decided to develop some of the above tendencies. And so we're going to be on this slide for a while, so I apologize. But the first one, report on events, teams, and student athletes. So what this means is basically the SID writes everything from press releases to player bios. In 2013 and 14, my last years being a full-time SID, there were over 350 news releases that were published on the athletic website. So it is almost a daily job, a daily occurrence where you write. Reporting also includes nominations, and a lot of those have to deal with Conference Player of the Weeks, different things with the NCAA, Division II, and then the COSIDA Academic All-American Team, which is actually a really big deal. If a student athlete gets that award, I always feel, and I know Con probably shares the same feeling, that you kind of really succeeded. You helped promote this student athlete to really get a high honor that is going to be included on resumes probably for the rest of their life. Maintain and update the athletic website. This, in my opinion, is probably the biggest part of the job. The website really is number one, and if it's ever wrong, you will hear about it, most likely from John Axtell. And probably the biggest change during my time being the SID was just how much the web changed. Originally, I think it was kind of just kind of another vehicle to have stories and different content on. We were lucky if we had photo galleries in 2007. And now in 2017, you can stream video and audio on your mobile device and have all these different types of things. And 10 years ago, we never even dreamed of that. And so a lot has changed. Again, in 2013-14, there was 1.1 million unique page views to the athletic website. So there were a lot of people who look at the Chadron State College website. And that's kind of cool. Things that you help produce are being seen by that many people. Documentation and cataloging of stats. That's an important one. You want to be as accurate as you can with stats. They have to be perfect because they are the basis of so much. They seriously can cause people to lose jobs. Coaches are fired over wins and losses, and those are important to keep track of. But with that, the cataloging of stats, it doesn't mean necessarily everything that happens during games. You want to also keep track of teams' records on the road, teams' records in neutral sites. You want to keep track of coaches' records against different opponents, or potentially players' records against different opponents. There's things like that. So there's a lot of different components that go into the stats. Travel. That's a big part of the job. It used to be a much larger part, kind of piece of the puzzle, because the internet, again, has changed things so much with statistical services. A lot of times SIDs would have to travel to the opponents and kind of work up their own stats. But now that's not the case. But with travel, particularly at the beginning of my career, the football team was really good. And because they were so good, they required a lot of attention, and there was a lot of media intensity, and it just made it easier to travel. But during my career, I tried to travel with every team, and I think I actually got it done in 2013. And so that was always a lot of fun to do. Compose post-game reports for media. These are pretty much press releases. The tough thing about this is you have to be correct and you have to be your own proofreader a lot of the time because you're working on it late at night or on a Saturday afternoon where you can't really get in touch with a lot of people. And so that's where my Star Herald training with deadlines really came into play. Basketball is probably the toughest because they typically play conference doubleheaders, which means back in the old days they would start at 6 o'clock and then they would play again at 8 o'clock or 8:30, or if the women's game went in overtime, 9 o'clock. And so a lot of times what I would try to do is write the women's basketball story during halftime of the men's game. And that helped me save some time, but there's still a lot of late nights.
There's also, you might want to point out the pressure also that you're getting from the rest of us in the media, the newspapers that have to go to press. They're trying to get you to get done. The rest of us, maybe we're just trying to go home.
Right.
Because the football game ended at 3 o'clock and we want to go home by 6.
Sure.
But you've got everything else to do. That's just that much more pressure. And in the old days, when you started, and particularly when Con was doing it, it was even worse on the road because you basically had to have it written before we left wherever we were. And
Yeah.
the people that we were writing with were always unhappy.
Yeah, whenever I was on the road, I tried to give myself 20 minutes to get a story done. If I made it within that time frame, I was pretty happy. A lot of times I didn't. At home, I would give myself a little bit more time, especially during the day, just because you have the ability to do that. But at night, as John mentioned, for instance, the Star Herald on Saturdays, their deadline usually for sports is 10:30, 10:40. And if a game gets done at a quarter after 10, you have maybe 10 minutes to write a capsule to email it and get it done. So sometimes misinformation gets out there, and that's just one of the things that happens, and you deal with it. But you just try to be as accurate and concise as possible. Develop media guides, game programs, recruiting materials, and other documents. So this is basically page design. Media guides really were a big deal when I first began. They're not so much anymore, but I used to dread, oh buddy. I used to dread July and August because that meant that I had to start working on the football media guide, which usually was a behemoth in the neighborhood of 128 pages. And you compile so many stats and you look at so many things and you write so many player bios. Eventually I would fall asleep at night and dream of numbers. And it got really, really draining after a while. Media guides are important though. Also for the media, it gives them a lot of information, but really they're important for the institution as well. They're a history-keeping tool. And so if you have that catalog of every year, it's just another way to catalog and document those stats. The other thing I want to talk about is game notes. As Dave and John know, game notes are very important for broadcasters. They give them the opportunity to know little kernels of information. And so the next time you're watching a football game and it says, that's Jim Margette's 60th game with a touchdown catch, that most likely came from an SID. It could be a national announcer saying that, but he read that on a PDF or a handout that an SID created. And so it's a behind the scenes sort of thing, but it's really important. And it's a good way to get your school and the student athlete's name out there. So manage statistic personnel, coordinate game logistics, including PA and scoreboard. As you can imagine, game days were stressful. There's a lot of logistics that are involved. Swallow it down, man. He's okay. He's just tired of hearing his dad talk.
Amen.
Yeah. But for all indoor games, what I would do is I would try to arrive at least an hour and a half before. You'd start the clock at 60 minutes prior, and then that begins just a litany of tasks. You need to start with the game music. You need to go check if the officials are here. You need to see if the scorebook is filled in for basketball. You need to double check if there's anything going on at halftime. You need to double check with Daniel and his crew if everything's going okay with the live streaming. You need to double check with the radio broadcasters that they have a feed and they have a signal going out. make sure the live stats are updated, make sure you have the proper statistic file loaded. So there's a lot to it. And I always kind of thought, if you measure twice, you cut once. And so I maybe arrived a little too early, but I was always a little cautious. Finally, the last two, maintain statistics and historical records. That's kind of self-explanatory. We'll get into the stats in a little bit. And then serve on various committees. Obviously, colleges love to have meetings, and that's a part of the job. But what kind of stinks about it being an SID, so if you have a basketball doubleheader and it gets over at 10:30 and you don't get home until 11:30, and then you have to stay up and unwind and get to bed at 1, well, the work day begins at 7:30 the next day, and there's no stopping it. And so you put in a lot of hours, but hey, it's all worth it. You're all here tonight. Okay, let's see if the clicker works. So 2007, I'll talk a little bit about it. It was a little wild year because it was my first year on the job, and Danny Woodhead, as some of you may know, at the time was looking to become the NCAA all-time rushing leader. He succeeded in that, but it was a lot of fun to work that year on trying to promote him. The New York Times, Sports Illustrated, other national media, ESPN, CBS Sports, ABC came onto campus. And so I was like, this is awesome. Every year is going to be like this. And they haven't been back since. But Danny won, as it says, a two-time Harlan Hill winner. One quick story about Danny. CBS Sports wanted to film him running through drills. They wanted to have this dramatic segue. And as he was running through the drills and everything, we got it done. And we're walking down to the locker room at the old Armstrong building. And there was a huge snake that came by. And I was 2 months on the job. I saw my entire career flash before my eyes that Danny Woodhead was going to get bit by a snake. and I'd be out of a job, he'd be out of a career, the team would be at a loss, I'd be the culprit. It was terrible. So I pushed Danny out of the way, and it ended up being a bull snake, so it wouldn't have hurt him anyway. But that's just another part of the job. You got to protect the athletes. And then Danny, a lot of you probably know him. He's like, "What are you doing, man?" But yeah, so I'm glad he didn't get bit. I would have been in trouble.
That was good coverage by you.
Yeah, exactly.
Alex, can I interrupt?
Yes.
You know, it was a great thing that you came that year because I think you spent half your time during the fall of taking these people around and showing them around and stuff. And, you know, I stayed in the office most of the time and did a lot of the writing.
Yeah.
But you entertained all those guys, except I got to do the one from New York Times that told me he'd driven the car 140 miles an hour around the Ulrichs because he didn't see anything else. The car was clocked to like 160. He came up from Houston. He was not I thought he'd come in a suit and everything. He would wear Levi's and
Some
like
scruffy
that.
guy.
Anyway, he was a crazy guy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, Con, because there's never been an athlete at Chadron State, and I don't know if there ever will be one since, who required so much media attention. I mean, I remember going over to his house 2 times a week and having him sign flags because so many people were sending in stuff that they wanted signed. He'd come in every Tuesday morning because he'd have radio, and I never wanted to give his phone number out. He'd have radio people call in, and so we would dial out from my office. And Con always brought us donuts, so I appreciate that, Con. But there was a lot to it, a lot of behind-the-scenes running around stuff. I'll go over this real quick, but I don't want to just talk. It's not just about Danny Woodhead. There's been so many other great moments. In 2012, when CSC beat UNK late on a late night, it wasn't a buzzer beater, but it was late in the game to get into the RMAC playoffs, and they haven't been there forever. Armstrong was so loud. The student section was fantastic and hilarious at that night. I think a couple of the students jumped out and danced to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was just such a unique atmosphere. And the Chacoin Center is great, but I haven't seen it achieve that type of atmosphere yet, and hopefully it does. Helping the football team remove tons of snow from Elliott Field in October, and Randy was there. He can remember how heavy that stuff was. But it really showed the pride that these students had in their school, and they'd only been here 3 months. And the pride that the coaching staff, alums, and even administrators had in the school. I think we started maybe at 6 a.m. and got done around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but I don't remember the actual figure. One of the coaches at the time was a math GA and figured out how many tons it was. But
513, Alex.
well, yeah, Colton remembers. He was there.
I was there.
Yeah, I was sore for a long time after that, as I'm sure you were too. Having cross country begin was really kind of cool. I'd never had the chance to help spur a sport along since it had been here. It had been around in the 70s and 80s, but coming back was pretty neat. And so that was fun to be involved with some of those initial meetings. Seeing Brett Hunter win a national title was really cool. Brett is a really good guy, and wrestling so much different than other sports. You see how hard these guys work. It's one-on-one, and there's no hiding. There's really no teammates around. And so it was really cool to see him culminate his season. Glenn Clinton running at AT&T Stadium. It was a really neat environment. Having a chance to go to AT&T Stadium with the team, helping John broadcast the game there, just seeing the guys and the opportunity that they got to play in such a cool spot was a really, really fun thing to do. And Glenn is just one of my all-time favorite football players and people. He's a big goofball, but I love the guy. The volleyball team in Armstrong, as I mentioned, Armstrong has kind of a unique aura to it. And the volleyball team always played hard in Armstrong. They may not have always won, but they always played hard, and so it was a lot of fun to stat those matches and to cover them. This is Katie Londo juggling before a game in Austin. And one of the perks of being an SID and really working in a college is you have the opportunity to have not necessarily an influential role in these students' lives, but you have the ability to insert yourself in their lives at a very meaningful age for them. And to get to know them as people is a really neat experience. And Katie was a good juggler. This is Caitlin Petrie. She's now a professor in the business department, so obviously she's a smart cookie, but she was also a great basketball player. She's the only women's basketball player who ever had a triple-double. And if we have time later, I'll talk a little bit about stats, but I may have fudged. I have to admit, I may have fudged on one of her assists. This is Brad Gamble. He won a national title in track. It was the first one in track for a long time. And it's been a lot of fun to cover Brad as a student and Brett as well, and then to work with them as colleagues. It's kind of neat to see that transition, or it just means I'm getting old. All right, so Stat Crew, this is what you all came here for, right? Okay, I can feel the enthusiasm. But so Stat Crew software, this is the software program that the NCAA mandates all SIDs, all schools to use. There was a website, I think they still have it, called Presto that some people used, but a majority of SIDs use Stat Crew. All home SIDs are responsible for operating Stat Crew. The program does sports for CSC, men's and women's basketball, volleyball, softball, football, and then it can also do golf and tennis and different things like that. But it's an NCAA rule that stats be provided, so it's a big part of the job. There's a lot of stuff that goes in. I'll try to explain it a little bit better. This is the home screen for the Stat Crew program. It's DOS. It stands for Disk Operating System. Other words, very old. A lot of the students in here probably have no idea what this even is. There's no way you use a mouse. Everything is keystroke based. So if you look at this is the in-game scoring screen. And so this tells you the scores right here. This tells you the prompts. And this is the most recent plays. It should show the most, I think 15 or something. So we'll start at line 393, okay? So what this means is this is the 393rd play in this game. The home team has the ball, and then this would be the score if there's a running score. So what this means is home served, the person serving was number 28. Everything's based on numbers. There's no names. That goes to the visitor's side of the ball. There's a dig by 10 and attack by 2. Goes back to home. There's a dig by 3 and attack by 21. Back to visitor, dig 9, attack 2. Home, dig 13, kill 21, and then the set assist went to 11, which resulted in the point 24 to 15. You're also supposed to track subs, everything like that. So there is a lot of keystrokes that are involved. With that, if you know volleyball, with attacks and different things like that, you put attack in as the code, but it only counts as a kill if it's actually resulting in a point. So that's a nice thing that they have. If some of you grabbed the handout you saw, I think it's a basketball one, but there's all these letters that correspond to different things. And so you get very used to speaking a different language. If my caller was talking to me, he or she would say home serving 10, and then they would just say D or A. They wouldn't even say attack. So then all that DOS mumbo jumbo turns into this. This is a box score. As you can see, it's broken down by the player's name and their corresponding number in the team. And then the set, the kills, the errors, total attacks, and the percentage. And then there's all this other stuff here. There's also usually space down here for specialty stats, but that's not on this box score. So basically, this creates this, which is then exported to the web and to the NCAA through XML, which is just a different type of HTML. So it's very important. Now we'll look at football. And I was really hoping that we could show the football game film, but we're not going to be able to. So this is the main screen. Again, we have this. This breaks down for first downs, all this stuff. With football, though, there's the opportunity for a lot of plays. If you picked up that box score, it's from the CSC Abilene Christian game in 2007. And at the time, that had set 13 NCAA Division II records. I think some of those have since not been counted as records because Abilene Christian provided crock pots to its football team, and that was seen as an NCAA violation. And so the game technically never happened, but CSC won, so that's good. We can count the stats, but they can't.
I thought when they vacated, it was just the losses, or I thought it was just the team that had done the infraction that was vacated.
Right, so it counts as a win for us, but since...
But all of the statistics that we had.
Not all of them, some of them do. Like it's still the largest comeback and different things like that, because that was the CSC portion of it.
Okay.
But things for combined total offense and stuff like that, or null and void, unfortunately. So football, you provide the quickie stat, and Dave has seen this, and John has seen it. So usually this is considered team stats up here, and then this is the individual stats, and then scoring summary here. I won't go too much into detail, but if you have some box score questions later, ask me. But basically, this just breaks it down. It's a one-sheet handout that you give to the media, and they are able to broadcast over it. The other nice thing that this program does is it creates a post-game report that is typically anywhere from 14 to 20 pages long, and it includes complete play-by-play. It's one thing I haven't shown on this is play-by-play. By those lines of text that you put in, it creates a play. And in StatCrew in football, you can go really in depth. The NFL does it. They don't use StatCrew, but they use a program similar to it, where they talk if you're in the pistol or in the shotgun, and if you're running left or right or off tackle or off the guard. So you can really go in depth. And you can do that on StatCrew here, but I never have. So the hardest game I ever statted for football was in 2012. It was when CSC played Colorado Mines. It started as a nice day, just like today, and then it turned into a blizzard. By the third quarter, I think this was the view. So they were nice enough to paint, or to kind of take a shovel and give us 5 yards, but everything in football is based on 1 yard. This was the view from the press box in the fourth quarter. So as you can see, you can't see lines. So what we did, we went, when this was going on, Justin Haig and I took pieces of paper in the press box and said, this is the goal line for the west side, this is the goal line for the east side, and built it in until the 50-yard line. So we basically had reference points to stat this game because this did not last long. I would put most of the stats that I do up against to say that they're 100% accurate. That game would not be. The biggest thing is we got the score right, CSC won, and they went to the playoffs. This is basketball. Basketball looks much like that. Although basketball, the one thing that's different with it, the other StatCrew programs will allow you to change uniform numbers midway through the game. Basketball will not let you do that. And if you do get off on numbers, then this screen, so as you can see the numbers right here, then this screen, everything drops down. So say this number 11, her stats would go to number 14, and it gets really screwed up with numbers, and I don't know why. It happened one time, and then the computer lovely shut down during the game. And so Ryan Shield, who's a good friend of mine, he actually called basketball games for me. He wrote down the codes, and I think you have the codes as the handout. So he would say J23 RDB, which means a rebound defensive dead ball. And he would write that down, and we were able to put that in, and we got it done before the game ended. How we did that, I'm not sure. The other hard thing about basketball is you'll see it doesn't show up on this screen, but it shows up on the box score. A big part of basketball is minutes, and coaches really track minutes. And so you have to stat every sub that comes in. So that volleyball match I showed you, there's like 400 lines of stat text. Basketball games typically get into the thousands because there are so many substitutions. And so your time is just spent doing this the entire game. So you really understand home row keys. I didn't talk about, we'll get to this in a sec, but I didn't talk about wrestling or track and field. They have stats. It's a little bit of a different program. Track and field uses this thing called High-Tech Meet Manager, which actually is a video recording device, and they have a finish line camera set up. And so I've helped with that. Wrestling uses this thing called track wrestling, which is web-based. So I've done that. And I didn't mention softball, but if you know how to score baseball or softball, it's pretty easy. So if you're interested, talk to Caleb Center. He's the SID here. We're always looking for help in the softball press box. But I'd like to finish. I've been privileged to work with some really great people, made a lot of friends, worked with some really wonderful colleagues. But watching student athletes have success when they're in a really great point in their lives has really been the best part of the job. And I always thought I really had to write about bad things. Losses didn't really count to me because it was just a game. And so I've been lucky to keep in touch with a lot of these people. I get invited to weddings every year, Facebook messages, stuff like that. And so it makes me feel really great that something that I did made a difference. When I went with Shawn to the radio yesterday, Jeremy Anderson asked me a question, and I said, and I'd never really thought about it before, but he asked me, do you think a lot about these students? And for 9 years, I am linked to all of these students. I know their first names, I know their last names, I certainly know how to spell their names. And I've seen them accomplish some really great things. And that is a cool thing. And so I've been really lucky in that regard. And so I feel like I have a pretty good winning percentage. But any questions? I'd love to open it up to questions. And for those of you who don't know, this is my lovely wife, Brittany.
Do you still want to be an actor?
No. No, I came to CSC. Roger Mays recruited me. And I came here on a theater scholarship, and I just wanted to write, and I knew I couldn't do both. And so, yeah, no, I don't really think about it much anymore. Yes?
When you're explaining the stat system and the brushstroke keys, there's no doubt a lot of mistakes, or some mistakes, I should say, made throughout that process. Could you talk a little bit about maybe which sport was the hardest to go back and fix?
Sure.
Maybe the process?
They're all a little bit different. Basketball is kind of easy because everything's based, there's a running clock in basketball, so if you do screw up, you can say, hey, go back to 1854. And so that's a little easier to fix. Football is kind of screwy. Everything's based off the play. But if there's an interception, then it automatically goes to the opposing team in the plays. And so you kind of have to do an extra step. So I would say football is probably the hardest. Softball is pretty easy to fix. It's just like filling in a game book. And so if it was a 6-3 ground out instead of a 5-3, you just go back. But you use the F keys a lot on the keyboard, and F10 clears your most recent input, and so you use F10 a lot because you either put in the wrong number or the wrong code. Good question.
One more question. Did you have a favorite team or sport specifically that you covered throughout your time?
A favorite team? Yeah, I would say, those early years with football, just because I had to travel with them and they had so much success, it was really neat to be involved with that. I mean, I really felt like a member of the team. John and Dave probably have similar feelings. You get to know the guys on such a different level. For instance, in 2008 or 2009, I can't remember, we challenged this guy named Shane Dennehy to eat deviled eggs, and he ate 20 of them. And we had to ride back in the bus with him, but it was just so hilarious. And then the offensive linemen, if it was after a win, for whatever reason, they always wanted to take their shirts off and have a shirt-off party in the back of the bus. And so Axe and I would go back in the bus with them sometimes and join in the revelry. So that was a lot of fun.
I observed, I did not participate.
But it's watching I traveled with all the other teams too, and there were some really good softball teams going to Austin, Texas with the girls who ended up qualifying for the Armrack playoffs was really cool too. Yes.
McCook High School has a pretty good athletic tradition there. Is some of the athletes that you went to school with, are they a little surprised that this aspiring actor ended up in the middle of Danny Woodhead's?
Yeah, that's a good question. I never really kept in touch with the guys who were athletes at my high school. All my buddies were English nerds or theater geeks, and I still stay in touch with all of them. A couple of my friends played sports, but I don't think they were ever shocked. I mean, I think from a very young age, I was telling this story the other day, and maybe my mom could fill it in more, but I remember my dad would let me stay up late and watch games. When the Cubs won the World Series last week, I told Brittany that one of the best memories of my dad is when he wrote a note to me saying that Nolan Ryan pitched a no-hitter. And I just thought that was so cool that I was like, my dad told me this, and so I was glad to watch the Cubs game, even though I'll never remember with Bridger. But I don't think they're surprised. I've always been involved with sports. So no, I don't think so. Yes.
This isn't directly a sports information thing, but it is and it isn't. But there's a change in sports, the way sports are reported. It used to be when I started, I was taught you always featured the team that won. Now, half the time when a team loses, it's always so that they came up short or they fell or something to the winning team. And
you bury the lead.
I do not like that style, but I noticed the other day in the Rapid City paper, both Black Hills and South Dakota Mines volleyball teams lost. But that wasn't the way that the story started out, that they just fell or they slipped or they came up short and something like that. And they always feature the home team, and I think it should feature the winning team. I don't care who it is, and I always like to put in something about who had the most spike or who had the most kills for the winning volleyball team, even though she's from Colorado Mines or that gal the other night for Adams State that blocked about 15 of Chadron's shots. It seemed like,
Yeah, that's.
I don't know. It's just a trend, I guess. But I did notice in the Eagle the other day that the gal wrote that Colorado Mines pounded the Eagles 40-14. I thought, yes, that's the way that story should have been.
Yeah.
When you lose that bad, I mean.
Yeah, that's.
Change that's happened.
Yeah, Con and I. What Con's kind of describing is the inverted pyramid. You take the most important information and you start your story with that, because no one's going to read after 6 sentences. And then so you want to get that point across. And then you kind of put the extraneous stuff later towards the end. But he mentioned also that there's more specialized writing. There's more, I guess, politically correct writing that you do. Where you say, well, the team didn't win, but gosh darn it, they played hard, and things like that. And I never liked that. It's easier to write Con Marshall had 13 kills and 10 digs to lead South Dakota School of Mines to a blah 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 win, and And when I'm writing on deadline, I tend to go for the low-hanging fruit.
On
And
another-
so that's the way I would
Along that
write.
same line, you know, the AP, I always like to read those little short things in the papers on after the Sunday football games. And every story starts off, and same way with basketball, every story almost starts off with who scored the most points, or who threw the winning touchdown, or all that, or who threw the most touchdowns. I think though you could hit a half-court shot at the buzzer sometimes, and that won't get in the lead. And those AP stories that are just kind of cookie-cutter stories for every game, and you know, to me, I think they just get in a pattern of how they're going to write it, like AP does.
Yeah.
And the fact that they seem to think everyone is interested in knowing what the name of the facility that the game is being played in.
Well, you got to get the sponsorship dollars.
Anyway, that's fine.
I mean, even when it's a non-sponsored state college, I mean, it's got to be the Goodell Gymnasium or whatever. Most people just say, oh, it's at South Dakota Mines. That's all we care about. I mean,
Yeah, you know, it's a tough gig writing for a broad audience. You serve a lot of masters, and you're never going to make everyone happy. You're always you're gonna do something that someone's gonna disagree with, or you're gonna write something, or you're gonna put a quote in there that is gonna really make a coach upset, and you're like, you're throwing me under the bus. I've heard that before, and hey man, you said it. And so I'm reporting the facts, and I didn't talk about it, but a big part of the job is, yeah, I loved it when good things happen for Chadron State athletic programs and the student athletes, but you have to remain neutral. You cannot get emotionally involved in it. Otherwise, you're going to lose your focus, and you're going to write a slanted news piece. And if that happens, you lose all credibility, and no one's going to read you. And that was really important to me. I always really wanted to be professional, and I always really tried to run a professional press box or media row or whatever, because you're working. Yeah, there's a game going on, but you're working, and you need to have that separation going on. Otherwise, in my opinion, I don't think you're doing your job properly. Yes.
Alex, so you're a foreign English major, and I know when you wrote your English papers, you probably spent days or weeks on those essays.
Hours.
Still, that's better than 15 minutes or 10 minutes writing. It blows my mind that someone can even do that. I don't know, can you just describe the process of how long it goes to write a 15-minute, press,
Sure.
report on it?
So maybe we can go back to the box score. There it is. So the first thing I do, obviously, most important thing, did the team win or lose? So you look at the score. So Regis won 70. Okay, Regis won 70, so I go find Regis. All right, Bailey Purdy scored 20 points, and this girl had 10, and this girl had 8, and this girl had 9. So, okay, Bailey Purdy scored 20 points and grabbed 6 rebounds to lead Regis University to a 70-58 victory at Chadron State College Friday afternoon at the Chacoin Center. So there's your lead. And then fill it in. Jessica Ramos, Carice Williams, and Kaylee Rader, combined to score 44 points is whatever their record is, if it's on here. Yeah, the Rangers moved to 18-10 and 16-6 in the RMAC. The leading scorer for Chadron State, blah, blah, blah. Well, right there's 3 or 4 paragraphs.
But then sometimes you also wind up leading by what happened. For instance, when somebody hits a three-pointer from half court or almost
Right.
half court at the buzzer to win the game, that fortunately writes itself.
The other thing is there's these specialty stats down here which really help. So as you can see, the score tied 0, lead change 0. So you can say Regis led wire to wire in a 70-50. There's different ways that you can get the point across that they won, and they probably won big.
So would you find that sheet more helpful than watching the game, just actually visually watching the game?
Yeah, a lot of times when you do stats, you know what's going on, but you're not necessarily covering it journalistically. When reporters cover things, they file a bunch of different capsules. They keep writing and they write and they file up to the end of the first quarter and then the second quarter and the third. And their story is always evolving. With doing stats, I would obviously think of the important things and kind of make a mental note. But Yeah, the box score sheet was always helpful, and if I had questions, I'd go look at the play-by-play. Yes.
So when you were SID, were you doing stats too? Like, but you would be the caller. You wouldn't be the person putting it in. So you would be able to watch the game.
I inputted for every sport.
So you didn't really see it much.
Well, the nice thing is, once you figure it out, it's like a second language, right? And so, just like how if you're a good typist, you don't need to really. So there's a few times where I did volleyball matches by myself. I was scared to death to attempt it, but I did it. And I don't know if they're 100% accurate or not, but basketball is pretty easy. You can do it by yourself. The hardest part with basketball is tracking the subs. And then sometimes when weird things happen, because sometimes technical fouls don't enter as personal fouls, and it's kind of based on the referee. And a lot of times the officials aren't very good at communicating that to the stat people. They'll communicate that to the scorebook, but not the stat people. For softball, I used to do the stats, run the PA, run the batter's music, and run music in between innings. So you're kind of busy up there. Any other questions?
I was going to say, in that story, you could almost say, even if you want to make it a Chadron State, kind of put Chadron State in, you could say Aaron Graham and Macadish combined for each scored 20 points. However, but Regis University still goes to a 70 to 58 victory or something.
Yeah, and the other thing with writing stories, and maybe it's the same for the other writers in the room, it's almost like a formula. You figure that X is Chadron State and Regis is Y, and how do the two fit together? Well, it's always going to be the same if the visiting team wins, or it's always going to be the same if Chadron wins or loses or whatever. It's just, you're just messing around with verbs and adjectives, you know? And could I have done that in 15 minutes when I was a 25-year-old SID? Probably not. So again, after a while, you know, it's just part of your job. You get really quick at it, and hopefully you do it right.
Did you find yourself changing your if not writing style, approach a bit when you went from being the sports writer to being the SID, where you're not just telling the general public, here are two teams that met, but now you're talking about your team, you're having to make sure you get your names out there, your stats out there, more importantly than the other team?
Kind of, but you know, Chadron's kind of a unique media climate. That a lot of the news and information flow from the athletic department is contingent upon the SID office, and so I think I probably always leaned a little bit more towards the journalistic side than probably the school side. Sure, with other things, you know, like personnel changes and stuff like that, you toe the company line. But you know, with a news story related to a post-game or pre-game stuff, I usually skew journalistically.
One of the comparisons would be if you go to Nebraska's website, all of their stories
are AP.
Well, beyond that, they're Nebraska.
Right.
The Huskers can get killed, but the lead is always going to be something positive from the Huskers, because that's the approach they've established for themselves.
Yeah, I think a lot of it probably depends on the SID. The way I was taught was to tell a story and tell it completely. And if that includes Chadron State losing or Chadron State winning, great, that's part of it. But maybe that's where my neutrality got in the way sometimes. But you know, I will say I wrote a lot more losses than I wrote wins.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes looking back at my writing career critically, I definitely skewed too much journalistically, because it was easy to fall into that, because I was almost always under deadline and writing for what I considered a specific audience.
Don't you think, Alex, that having some newspaper experience first was of great value to you when you came in SID, though?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Because I think that
you learn about deadlines.
People that go to work for a college when they're a student as an SID and never go out and work in a newspaper or a radio station, probably either. It doesn't matter what media, and just stay there. I don't think they catch the.
Yeah. You know.
thing you need to really emphasize is.
Yeah, again, it just kind of depends on what you want to do. You know, as
They used to call SIDs tub thumpers, because they, kind of the deal was they go out maybe even go ahead of the team, because there wasn't all the internet and all the photos and stuff, and spend maybe 3 or 4 days going around to all the radio stations or the newspaper and telling them how great the team was that'll be coming here on Saturday. And they called that tub thumpers, or at least Greg McBride did in the Omaha World Herald.
Yeah.
That you were beating the drum for the team that was coming to town to play the, you couldn't just go to the internet and see how many points so-and-so was averaging or how many touchdowns they'd scored before they came, and you kind of, that was way before my day too, but doing anything, but it was.
yeah,
Did that happen, Con, with the SID, like call the coach back and then say this, like give a scouting report?
I've been called by coaches before. And sometimes coaches would want me to call SIDs and be like, hey, why isn't this guy playing?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
See how bad that quarterback got hurt last week,
Yeah.
yesterday's game or something.
But
And did you also find at times you were pressured by coaches not to say, this guy is hurt, or this guy's not playing because we don't want to give them any?
well, that's always that's changed so much, because now with, there's all these HIPAA regulations. And so I can remember, Jamie Wada tore an MCL and ACL in a game. He blew up his knee. He's done for the year. Well, that probably would have been written 10 years ago. If that's written now, there's some serious questions that have to be answered. And you speak, as the SID, you speak for the institution. And so I would keep the institution's best interest at
I was
heart.
thinking more of some of the times where maybe he's sprained his ankle and he won't start, but the coach is not going to, the coach won't even change the starting lineup.
Yeah, there's gamesmanship involved for sure. And I would usually try to be a little coy about it. Yeah. Well, and sometimes you kind of have to lie. As being an SID, your job is to give all this information out and, come freely and give it away. And sometimes coaches would say, I don't want you to tell this to this person. Well, if I would get asked, what do I do? Those are dilemmas that would exist. But to kind of just latch on to Con's point, I always tell people when they ask me about being an SID or in my current job now, I always try to be good at everything. You can't be great at one thing. And so if you're a Pulitzer Prize winning SID, that's wonderful, but you're gonna suck at social media and getting the word out on YouTube and all that stuff. And so you have a lot of responsibilities, but you have to be able to prioritize and to be able to put in everything into all those things, because you're serving a lot of audiences. You're trying to get the information out as much as you can. And so you're busy all the time. There's very little slow time, as Con can attest to.
How difficult?
Everybody's day to day.
How difficult has it been for you to take, say, an ex-football player and sort of try to teach them how to write and be a sports information director and public relations type of person?
Depends on the writer. If you're referencing Connor over here, I think he's done a great job. Writing is just like anything else. You can learn how to do it. You just have to want to do it. And Connor is a willing student and has really jumped in, and I appreciate his help. Yes.
So you were an SID when you were single, and then you were an SID when you were married. How was that different?
Yeah, there's yeah, well, maybe Peg would probably want to hear this as well.
A lot of lonely weekends for the wives.
Yeah, you marry your wife for a variety of reasons, and I'm so glad that mine is patient with my career.
Me too.
And sometimes there's sacrifices that you have to make, and I can remember sometimes you and I'd be watching television, I'd be writing a men's basketball story, and you'd be talking to me like, hey, that SNL skit was really funny, and I didn't miss it, I didn't see it because I was writing something. Wireless internet has helped a lot with that, when I was able to go home and get some of that work done. But that is a big deal for a lot of SIDs. I think the burnout ratio for SIDs is like 6.5 years. And so you work hard for 6.5 years and then you're capped out. And I saw it. I was the longest tenured SID in the RMAC for 4 years, and it was because so many SIDs had come before me and then fizzled out because the job demands a lot. But thankfully, I had a patient and compassionate wife with that. But it is hard to balance that sometimes. You're absolutely right. But thanks for still letting me do football stats.
We just hang out in the seats right below the window.
Any other questions?
Well, nobody did the job better than Alex did it, that's for sure, so, great,
Oh, thank you, Con.
appreciate it.
Yeah. I appreciate that. It means a lot. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy Election Day.